It's been a little over a year since Breath of the Wild has released, and now that the game is completely done and has all of its DLC released, I think it's about time we ask, what's next for the Zelda franchise? So let's talk about that for a bit. Mainline Zelda games typically take a long time to develop and release, with a few exceptions like Majora's Mask. So when we look to the future of the franchise, I think it's pretty fair to see what was done before to try and sort of get an idea of what might happen. Now, obviously I'm not going to claim I know exactly what Nintendo will do. I'm not exactly some kind of fortune teller for the company. But I think sometimes it's a little fun to speculate. So we're going to do exactly that with this video. Now that we basically have just one console to work with, being the Nintendo Switch, it's pretty unlikely we're going to see another smaller top-down Zelda game like A Link Between Worlds was. Or is it? I mean, it's certainly possible that after such a huge game like Breath of the Wild, that Aonuma and his team would want to work on a smaller scope game. I could see another top-down Zelda game being made for the Switch, but it would have to have a lower price point to make up for the smaller scope of the title. You can't really have a smaller Zelda title alongside Breath of the Wild and charge the same amount. That's going to piss off a large amount of consumers, and it would be pretty obvious as to why. I mean, let's be fair here. They have done similar things in the past, so they could technically do it, but I just kind of hope they don't go down that route. So, in theory, they could make a smaller Zelda game, but then again, they could go down the route that many have mentioned and develop a game in a similar way as Majora's Mask. They could take the already huge world of Breath of the Wild and its assets to develop a sequel of sorts in maybe about a year or two, similar to the story of Majora's Mask with Ocarina of Time. This would mean another huge open world Zelda game in a much shorter time, but everything would feel pretty similar or familiar, and maybe exploring won't be as interesting as that was the major push or pull, I suppose, for Breath of the Wild. For this to work, they need some kind of unique trait to the gameplay that would keep us interested. Kind of what Majora's Mask did with the 3D mechanic. I'm not totally on board with this idea, to be honest with you guys, but I'm not really against it either. I'm sure I'd enjoy a game that's like this, and I actually really do want a sequel to Breath of the Wild, but I want something a little different. I want something like 100 or 200 years later where Hyrule is back and prosperous, but with that huge world. Something like that would mean a lot more work with this idea, but I'm certainly open to it. An idea like this would basically give us a very new world with huge castles and massive locations to explore that wouldn't have been there before. It basically would be reusing the same map, but with some added things to it that would make it feel new, if that makes sense. It's also just as possible that we aren't really going to see another mainline Zelda game for some time now. For a new Zelda game to share the same massive scope as Breath of the Wild would take years and years, and maybe that's what Nintendo intends on doing. If that's the case, I can see a very clear path for the franchise. If Aonuma and his team decides to take another, let's say, 5 or so years to develop the next massive Zelda game, Nintendo's going to want to fill that gap of time with Zelda content so the franchise stays fresh in everybody's minds. Hell, I honestly wouldn't be too surprised if we're already seeing this with the re-release of Hyrule Warriors on the Switch. The reason we are seeing that game again could very well be because Nintendo wants to fill the Zelda gap in 2018 with Hyrule Warriors, just to hold off the fans a bit longer. Then there is the rumored Skyward Sword HD, and it is supposedly coming to the Switch. Let's just pretend for a moment, let's just close our eyes and think about it for a second. Let's just assume that this rumor is real and that Skyward Sword HD is in fact a real game. I could easily see that game being an early 2019 release to, once again, tide us over for Zelda related content. That way 2018 is covered with Hyrule Warriors and Skyward Sword HD would cover for 2019. Although, if they do make a Skyward Sword HD remaster, I'd like to see it bundled with Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD, so that those Wii U ports are a little more enticing to say the least. I mean, if they sold Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD separate from Skyward Sword HD, and also put all that on the Switch, it's going to be kind of overdoing it, I think. It makes sense if they're all put together in one collection of sorts. But Since we're already assuming a ton for the future of the Zelda franchise, let's go even deeper. Deeper into predictions that would definitely be proven wrong by E3, but probably. If we see Skyward Sword in early 2019, then maybe we'll get a smaller top-down style game in 2020 that was developed by a smaller portion of the Zelda team, followed by maybe a small spin-off type thing like Triforce Heroes the year after. I don't really think Nintendo wants to turn Zelda into an annual franchise though, in any way. So I can also see a year or two of no Zelda titles at all. Probably not 2 years in a row, but every once in a while we'll probably see nothing. But I also just find it hard to believe they are willing to have zero content for another 5 to 6 years. So I expect that if we see another gap between this Breath of the Wild and the next Zelda, and it is a 5-year gap, they're gonna fill up those gaps with something. And with Hyrule Warriors already being released, that's probably the beginning to that. So, games like Hyrule Warriors or the rumored Skyward Sword HD honestly make a lot of sense to me. Look, I obviously have no idea what is next with the Zelda franchise. Whether that's a quick sequel, a Zelda collection, HD remakes, or smaller titles, the only thing I'm really confident in is we're going to see a lot more Zelda in some capacity real soon, and it's only really starting with Hyrule Warriors on the Switch. There's no way Nintendo's going to see the success of Breath of the Wild and say, yeah, sure, let's wait 5 more years with very little Zelda content, despite the success. They're going to find a way to fill the gaps, and they're going to do it relatively quick, I feel. I had a lot of fun making this video though, and just crafting predictions that no doubt is going to be proven wrong very soon, considering a lot of it was based off rumor. But let me know in the comments below, where exactly do you think the Zelda franchise will go after Breath of the Wild? And I'll look forward to those comments. I think the huge expectations Breath of the Wild left makes the Zelda franchise in a very interesting spot right now. Nowhere near a bad one, but an interesting one. So I'll talk to you guys in the next video.